right. Good morning, everyone. It is the Her Hoop Stats podcast. We are recording here on June 6th, Friday. And as always, I like to give the disclaimer of the time of day we are recording, which is pretty much first thing in the morning. So when inevitably something interesting comes out in a couple hours or minutes after we're done recording, as it always seems to be, all right, we're recording prior to all that. Not a whole lot has come out of the day today, but that doesn't mean that there isn't anything to talk about. I am joined today by Brittany Carper. Brittany, as always, thank you so much for joining me. And man, we were talking yesterday, and as I say, I feel like every episode, there's just so much that you can get into, especially when you get a decent enough sample size into the season where you can start talking about stuff without the disclaimer of, oh, it's so early. Oh, it's so early. You know, it's still pretty early, but we can start actually figuring some stuff out. We can feel more comfortable figuring some stuff out. And as I said, recording in the morning. But I feel like the thing that has stuck out to me the most and what I really want to get into with you today with your coaching background was the fact that some of these teams are having to figure stuff out on the fly so often, and what they find in one game may be so drastically different the next. And that's because of the fact that we've seen a significant number of injuries hitting, especially it seems like certain teams. And then we also are coming right up to the Eurobasket competition. And so there's some teams that are going to be losing a lot to that. And two of the teams that have been hit hardest by injuries and will be hit hardest by Eurobasket are Phoenix Mercury, have just had injury after injury, and then Golden State Valkyries, as they are kind of this international team, they're losing quite a bit as they get to Eurobasket. So when you get into a season and all of a sudden you're losing players that maybe you were relying upon consistently, you have to put people into new roles. Something that's obviously different from the WNBA to college is that they're signing people to contracts mid-season. Just how difficult is it to really be able to figure out a team's identity or find any level of consistency when it feels like lineups and rosters are so constantly changing?
I think really difficult. I think in those two teams situation, the Mercury have a little bit more of an advantage because they're an established franchise. So they also have some superstar player. You know, Sabali's there. Thomas has been hurt the last few games, but has been there. So they have a little bit more of a building block where they can kind of endure some of that, where Valkyries being completely new, really trying to figure out their identity as a whole, trying to plug in some of that stuff on the fly. It's going to be really, when they go forward, losing those players to Eurobasket, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of changes they make or what they kind of look like, because I think they're a team that has looked a lot better over the last couple of weeks, but they play really hard. And so you're going to have to find players that are going to be willing to kind of, pick up that load for the players they're missing. And so that's an interesting thing with, losing people midseason, like that to the injuries or, going to play Eurobasket. But it's really hard to fill those holes. But I think you saw down the stretch last night, especially, the difference in that to me was the Mercury had a player like Satu Sabali that they could throw the ball to. And now you're going to instantly make the other four players on the court better because all the attention was going to her. Whereas the last couple of possessions for the Valkyries, they don't have that player. You saw some, turnovers, not great shots. And so that to me is a big difference.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good point where you have not just someone who's going to be making the plays, but what you specifically point out is drawing all the attention. And so Satu being able to do that is a lot of how you open up many, many other players for those kind of looks that they were able to find. I mean, I think about how you have Lexi Held coming in and has a career night as a 25-year-old rookie. And that's what's so unique about this Phoenix team is they are predominantly made up of undrafted players. Like their new players are basically all undrafted, and not even just all overseas undrafted players like we see in a lot of other places, which, I mean, you have Ako Makani who came over from overseas, Musa, but then you have these players like Kat Westbeld, who I've talked about, costly because I think she's such a tremendous story. And then you have Lexi Held, who both are domestic players, but have been playing overseas for years and years and just keep grinding and keep working. And all of a sudden here you get not just an opportunity in training camp, but then you make the roster and you're contributing in these really big ways. And I think that there's this big boost that you get from not having a whole lot of expectation on you, frankly. Like you're not the known name. There's players around you that have a lot of expectations on them and have a lot known about them. You know, you have Sammy Whitcomb, who's one of the best 3-point shooters in WNBA history. You have, again, Satu, and then you have players like Kalani Brown coming in off the bench, who has been really consistent as a presence in the WNBA. They're able to bring in Haley Jones, who has experience, but Kat Westbeld, Lexi Held especially, I feel like have been able to come in and the focus isn't on them, but they have drawn the focus. Like they have risen to the occasion in such a massive way where they've been playing basketball, right? Like it's not like, oh yeah, I haven't played basketball since I graduated 3, 4, 5 years ago. Like that's not the situation at all. But to have those consistent presence and the veterans around them, and especially the way that Satu has stepped up with Alyssa Thomas out, has been super impressive. And I feel like that really raises the ceiling and raises the potential for Phoenix going forward. And they were talking last night on the broadcast, you know, they had the GM on and he was saying, yeah, we brought in a lot of these younger players or players that hadn't played in the league before because we want them to come back to us knowing that we're going into a year where people can go basically wherever they want. And so I thought that was a really interesting kind of tidbit to say, yeah, I mean, these players aren't under contract for next year, but we found these sort of diamonds in the rough. And man, if you can keep this sort of group around for a while, I think that they've got a lot of potential. And that's not something I maybe would have said coming into the year because it's just players that we didn't really know a whole lot about.
Right. And I think the experience that you mentioned, especially with like Alexi Held, you're not coming into a league without international experience or kind of a professional level experience. So that's extremely different than a rookie coming straight from college who maybe isn't used to the physicality, the way the game is played. And so to me, what is really cool about that is you're giving a lot of players that maybe haven't had an opportunity to make a team in the W yet, but have been over, you know, playing internationally in the future years with expansion and maybe roster sizes increasing, for them to have more opportunities to come back over to the States and get, you know, an opportunity to make a team in the W because they've had that experience playing internationally.
And that's what I really wonder about here going forward is that, as we mentioned, you're going to have a number of players departing for Eurobasket, and not just from the Valkyries. So, as I said, they're probably going to be the hardest hit. But I mean, you have the Dallas Wings are losing two of their centers in Tier McCowan and Louisa Geiselsoder. You've got the Liberty, where you've got a couple of Germans and Leonie Fiebig, and then Niara Sabli hasn't played recently, so not sure if like that changes anything. But you have a number of players that are going overseas, and so especially for, again, a team like the Valkyries, where you're going to lose a number of players, they're likely going to be signing some short-term contracts. And so I'm very curious to see what their approach is for that and who they bring in, because you know, the obvious first thought is, okay, you bring in the players that you have in training camp. And for the Valkyries, you know, you'd be looking at one of the players that really performed consistently in the preseason, like Letitia Amihir. But then you're looking at who's leaving and you're saying, ooh, these are all your like true guards, your perimeter players. You know, you've got Julie Von Lowe, you've got Janelle Salon, you are maybe, I haven't seen confirmed anywhere, having Chechi Zandalazini go over, and then Temi Fag Benley. And so you've got one forward in that group, but you probably need guards. So I wonder if you go to a sort of similar route as Phoenix in that situation where you find some players that have international experience but maybe are not international products because they're mostly spoken for with Eurobasket. Like I can't
Yes.
reiterate that enough. And so I really am intrigued to see, especially for a team like Golden State that has relied so predominantly on overseas players, who they have their eye on, who they might be trying to bring in for the short time. And honestly, it really is a kind of bonus for them as well to keep giving people almost auditions for their program going forward. Because as you said, they don't have the benefit of being an established franchise. They don't have really those cornerstone pieces quite yet. They have, I mean, they have a roster full of like really tremendous role players, but they just don't have that go-to person. And I don't know that they even will have someone break out into that role this year. That's just not something that's guaranteed to happen. But if you can keep bringing in different players and keep seeing what they're capable of, then in the next year, 2, 3, as you're continuing to accumulate talent, continuing to like establish yourself, establish your culture, you're going to have a much better idea of, okay, these are the players that we have experience with, that have been here before, that understand what we're doing. And it at least gives you the opportunity to have a larger base, maybe, of players, a larger pool that you have experience with, because I think that that's something that's really underrated, is to have experience with players as a coach, as a program, as a system.
Definitely. I mean, that's usually the name of the game when you're successful, is the continuity of it. And so bringing in some players maybe that they've had their eye on or familiar with, that they think will be good contributors, not even in just a short term, but in like you mentioned, the years going forward, where they're really going to be able to help them kind of solidify that base that they need as a franchise to really get themselves to that next level.
And I mean, the other thing that I'm interested with Golden State is there's been reports that Ileana Repair is wanting to come over after Eurobasket, that maybe she was waiting until Eurobasket and then was planning on coming over. And so that's a player who would be going to the Valkyries. And so then they're potentially having to make some more roster adjustments in season. So something to keep our eye on there. Certainly, that's a couple weeks down the road, but I mean, I don't think that there's going to be like a massive level of consistency at any point this season for Golden State, just because of the fact that we're in a Eurobasket year, the fact that, they're still figuring a lot of stuff out as far as that goes. But to be competitive in as many games as they have been, and to continue to find, okay, there's a lot of things to work on, but there's a lot of, I think, positives that they're finding. People are getting more comfortable into their roles. Veronica Burton is having very much a career season for her, and that's someone who definitely you can build around, to have a solid kind of point guard distributor, to be able to say, okay, we're really going to be focusing on you when you're averaging nearly 6 assists and nearly 3 steals a game. Like, yeah, that's something that people want to play with. I'm very intrigued to see what they can figure out, and especially once they go up against maybe some of the other teams on a more similar level to them. Like, you're coming off of a stretch where you're playing New York twice, Minnesota,
Yeah.
Phoenix. You kept it close, which was, I think, really impressive. They had a close one against New York as well. Still got to go see Vegas, but then you get LA. I'm really excited to see them against LA. Really excited to see them against Dallas. Definitely a lot of interesting games in the near future here for the Valkyries.
Yeah, I would agree. It'll be interesting, like you said, to see them kind of on a more level playing field as to where they are right now.
There's certainly some teams that are, it's a little bit like tiered. That's always sort of the case. There's not any team that is like far and away better than everyone else, but beyond that, there's definitely games where you look at it and you say, I'm pretty sure this is going to be competitive. Then there's ones that you think that someone's going to run away with, and that doesn't end up happening. But there's There's been some teams with some really tough stretches, and so
Yeah.
I think it'll be really good for them and for us as viewers to get out of those sort of silos and to see some of the different competition, especially as we've talked about before, when you get 2 games in a row against the same team. It's just like, okay, let's see something different.
Yeah, yeah. We the viewers need a little bit more changing in the scheduling.
Yeah, for sure. And with that, we have a couple of games here coming up. I was just saying how I'm excited to see Golden State against the Sparks, but tonight the Sparks play the Wings, and as we mentioned, the Wings, they're gonna have some decisions to make, some calls to make, because you're losing not just Tierra McCowan, but Louisa Geiselsluiter, who is really just getting her feet under her. And I've said, I think that she is going to be tremendous still when she comes back from Eurobasket. It's kind of the name of the game when you're an overseas product. There's plenty of people who are overseas right now who are considering coming over after Eurobasket. And so I commend her for coming over before and then returning. So at least when she comes back, hopefully it'll be a little bit less of a learning curve. But for this Wings team that, again, a lot of changes from last year. You have Paige, who was put in the concussion protocol. And so then you're adjusting to her, adjusting to playing without her. And now all of a sudden you say, okay, well, Maisha Hines-Allen, you've been pretty solid for us in the post. But the 2 other players that we've been rotating in there, overseas, like they'll be gone for a while. So especially when it's one position,
Right.
what do you do there? How do you adjust to that? How do you even go about finding players who are going to be able to step in and contribute in any meaningful way?
That will be interesting to see what they choose to do, because you're not really going to have the familiarity. You're already in new system, new players, in and out of lineup. So I don't know, maybe they choose to go a little smaller and see if they can take advantage of people that are already there. I know they lose that size, and some of their matchups wouldn't be great, but for them, that might be the best option in the short term. In those first couple of games where you can plug in some holes because you have people that know what they're doing, what's expected, but like you said, Paige has been in and out of the lineup, and now you're losing the 2 center position where you've rotated them in and out, and that's a big in the W. That's a big spot, and it's not just someone that's filling a hole for you. They do a lot in terms of what you do defensively. A lot of offenses run through your bigs in this league, and so it'll be really interesting, and that's a thing I'm kind of looking forward over the next couple weeks to see what they choose to do, because that's they're already in kind of a peculiar spot with where they're at, and so I'm looking forward to kind of see what happens there.
And the thing that I'm really looking at is, as I'm sitting here, my first thought is, well, if they decide to sign someone to a short-term contract, well, the fact of the matter is that for Dallas, they're at a roster of 12 right now. And so even with both Tierra McCowan and Louisa Geiselsluiter going overseas, they still aren't at the threshold for an emergency hardship, barring Paige Bueckers being out for a more significant period of time, or Ty Harris being out for a more significant period of time. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the timeline looks like for them. I think that Paige has been practicing and maybe doing some non-contact stuff, so I would anticipate her being back sooner rather than later.
I think she was ruled out for tonight. I think I saw that this
She's
morning,
out
but
tonight,
yeah.
And then I believe they said they're evaluating for next game. And
Yep.
so, when you get into the normal hardship contracts, it's 2 weeks from when you apply, all that, whatever. So it's going to be really interesting to see, okay, what's Ty Harris's timeline? And then beyond that, exactly what you said. I really think that, I mean, not even think, there's not going to be another choice beyond going small a lot of the time, because your posts are now Maisha Hines-Allen and Alyssa Smith. and that's the list. And so, not that those aren't very capable players, but like Maisha Hines Allen has a little bit of an undersized aspect to her, and so there's times where she just doesn't match up great with teams, but I think that she's certainly a 5. And then Nalissa Smith is sometimes can play the 5, is a little bit more of a 4 a lot of the time. And so she's definitely going to be rotated into that 5 spot. You're going to have Maddie Segrist playing the 4. You're going to have, maybe Isaiah James, Kayla Charles, who knows? You're going to have like true guards in there playing not just the 3 spot, the 4 spot. And so the defense is going to be really crucial because, okay, on offense, spread it out, go on the perimeter, try and take advantage of mismatches. But on the other end, that's always kind of been my thing with the post, and especially with the wings and Tier McCowan. That's something that I've always been kind of looking for them to be able to utilize, and they have at points is, okay, even if she's a little bit outmatched on the defensive end, she can be so dominant offensively. And so I'm really curious to see how Dallas is able to avoid that being done to them, because gosh, I mean, obviously Asia Wilson is like just not a normal example because
Yes.
who does guard her well, right?
Right.
But then you get into, a Tina Charles or, any other more like traditional, Aaliyah Boston. And
Yep.
you say, okay, who's matching up there? Because you might be at a pretty significant disadvantage on the inside. And that's just something that I feel like the Wings can't really afford, to be at that significant of a physical disadvantage.
So maybe we see a little bit more mix up in their defenses, some zone, some more trapping off of ball screens or things where they can try to take advantage of maybe the quickness of their perimeter players to kind of, take away from what they're missing at the post and in the interior, because that isn't a quick fix. You can't just plug someone in there and hope that they're going to be able to go, against the bigs that we're talking about. So that will be, again, really, we'll see what they try to do defensively, because there's going to have to be some shakeup there. You're not just going to roll the ball out and say we're going to go man to man and see what's going to work for us. I don't think that's going to be the case. So I would probably, if I'm them, I'm looking at some different zones where you can mix and match and kind of change the pace of the game.
And the last thing I want to talk about is kind of broader, and that's with, as we talk about inconsistency, struggles, things like that. You have some teams that have gone through losing streaks, and that's like, I remember back when the Sky won their first game at Courtney Vandersloot said, we never lost belief. There's a lot of teams that after having 4 losses, people sort of check out, and that was not the case here. And there's not any teams that I feel like watching them and watching their body language, they seem checked out, but you just know that behind the scenes, it is so difficult when you go through those struggles, especially if, we're going to see some really major shakeups with players departing and things like that. So just on a broad level for these teams where they might be going through some of these struggles, you have to make sure that people aren't losing the buy-in, losing the confidence. Like, as a coach, as a program, how do you really make sure that you keep these players engaged and bought in? Because there's still a lot of season ahead. There's a lot to play for, even beyond the season going forward. And when things get tough, especially, with social media and all of that, like, how do you keep the players engaged and bought in?
I think the biggest thing, and you mentioned her, is the veteran presence. So if you have someone like a Courtney Vandersloot that understands the ups and downs of this league and what every team goes through, that's going to help tremendously. Is the veterans that can speak in the locker room, that understand, hey, this is the ebbs and the flows. We have to come to work, because that's what it is. It is their job. So you still have to come to work every day, approach to get better. The results, sometimes they follow, sometimes they don't. But also, you mentioned it earlier, a lot of these players are on 1-year contracts, or, essentially because of the new CBA. So they're also playing for jobs in the future. So, there's not like you're just going to, cash it in and say, all right, season's over. And then you have a franchise like the Valkyries. Most of those players understood what they were going there and, what's going to be, how hard it is, the challenges. So again, they're looking at it as an opportunity to showcase what they're capable of doing. Maybe in the future what that looks like for them. So I think, the biggest thing is the veteran presence. You have to have the voices in the locker room that can kind of combat any of the negativity that might start to spread, just because they've been there, they understand it. And then, like we said, it's their job. So you have to show up, and you're auditioning essentially for a lot of these players every day, every game. So we know as coaches talk, franchises talk. So if you become that player that doesn't show up, doesn't want to work hard, all those things, that gets talked about. People understand. You get that, you get that kind of reputation, and other franchises aren't necessarily going to want to sign you if that's the case. So I think those two things to me are the biggest going forward, is kind of keeping the morale high and understand what you're playing for.
And actually, you hit on several points that reminded me of one other thing I wanted to highlight from last night, which is in the Mystics and Liberty game. I saw a clip going around afterwards of the team gathered, just the players, not the coaches, and Steph Dolson just like going to each individual player and like really hyping them up, because I mean, what a performance by the Mystics last night. Like, I truly believe that if Kiki Iriafen doesn't get in foul trouble in the first half, gosh, I think the Mystics might win that game, because they kept it close even without her. Well, they had a quarter in the second quarter where they were outscored by 20 points.
Correct.
Mostly with her on the bench. And then she comes back in, and I mean, they really put on a great push. And up until the very end, where they had to start kind of pushing and fouling a little bit, I mean, Kiki Iriafen was a positive in the plus minus in the game. You had Jade Melbourne come in, and same with her. I mean, what an incredible game from Melbourne. And so I feel like to see Steph Dolson, and Steph didn't have a great game. She didn't have a bad game, but she didn't have a great game. But that's the presence that you talk about, where, I mean, she was tremendously efficient. She didn't miss a 2-point shot. She missed her 2 3-point attempts, but was 4 for 4 from 2. And she brings everyone together. You can just tell she's pointing at the scoreboard. She's pointing at them. She's saying, look what you did. Like, look what you did against one of the best teams in the league. Look at what you are finding in yourself, and especially when you're relying so heavily on extremely young talent, like not just your rookies in Sonia Citron and Kiki Iriafen, but you have the youngest player in the league in Jade Melbourne. Like, I mean, that's crazy to have that level of youth and players that haven't played together quite as much, but she is just so mature. And then what I also noticed and loved was down the stretch, I think it was the fourth quarter, Shakira Austin comes up the court with the ball. She stops at the top of the key and makes this gorgeous lob pass inside to Kiki, who finishes. And I think that made it like a 2-point game or something. And the Liberty call a timeout, and they come over, and Cindy Johnson's coming over to Shakira Austin, like pushing her over to the bench. And like, he has the biggest smile on his face. And it's just like, that is what I want in my coach. That is what I want in my team. Like, they're having fun. They care. Like, that's a connection that you don't see everywhere. And that's the kind of coach that players want to play for. And especially, Shakira Austin has had such a tough go of it with her injuries and things like that. And it's just like, you want to talk about, okay, people want to win games, whatever. You want to know how you bring players back next year when they're going to be free agents, is you show the potential you have with this. What I've said is, I think, like, the best young core in the league, and then you have
Yeah.
that kind of support coming from the bench. That's what's going to win the Mystics games this year and especially going forward. That's how you keep people engaged. That's why they're in basically every game. They've had one game this year that they lose by double digits. Beyond that, every single game has been single digits. Like, that's how you keep people engaged. And I think it's really impressive to have found a handful of coaches. Like, I think that Carl Smesco and his system in Atlanta is really similar. Like, I'm so encouraged by what I'm seeing from a lot of these new coaches, because you see a lot of kind of recycling previous to this year. And now going forward, it's so important to have good leadership, especially for these players and for their physical, mental well-being. I just thought that was really cool to see for the Mystics. It makes me so excited for the rest of the season as they continue to really build on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was, Shakira Austin's biggest hype man right there. And
Yeah.
that, like you said, I mean, for someone who's gone through what she's gone through in her career, and to have someone that understands how big that play was in that moment of the game was critical. And to see it celebrated in that fashion is the culture that they've created. And again, that's a product from the top down. So that's coaching staff, that's veteran players, and then you have young players. And I know they even referenced last night, Kiki saying she found the joy in playing basketball again this season through, 8 or 9 games or whatever. And
Mhm.
I thought that was really cool too, because for someone that had a really successful college career, but then has, come into the league, been a rookie, had success, but talking about finding that joy again and playing with a team that it's not like they're undefeated or, they're doing miraculous things, but they're playing really hard. They're playing together. They're connected. And you can see that as a product they put out on the court is they're going to compete hard. They're going to play together, and they're going to be a team that can weather some of those ebbs and flows of a W season because of what they've created, the culture that they've created there.
Yeah. I mean, I just think about how you've got Kiki and Sonia in the same draft class. And so if this is what they're doing 8, 9 games in, like, I'm imagining a year, two under their belt. Like, they already look like they were college teammates. Like,
Yeah.
they're so on the same wavelength. And I think because they are both such smart players, and they
Yes.
also are both players that are used to being kind of, this is going to sound like negative, but like second fiddle. Like, they have not been the primary focus. And so they come in, and as rookies, you're generally not going to be the primary focus, but very quickly they've established themselves as pretty much the number 1A and 1B options for the Mystics. And so I think that I would assume that there's a really good sense of like camaraderie and support between the two of them. I'm excited to see more like reporting and more coming out from them as they get more coverage and stuff like that, because I feel like that would be such a great support system to have within your team, of someone coming in the same draft class that had a very, very similar college experience, where you had Kiki playing alongside Cam Brink, and then playing alongside Juju, and then you had Sonia and all of the tremendous players she played alongside in Olivia Miles, Hannah Hidalgo at Notre Dame. And all of a sudden they come in, and now they're showing people like, hey, this is what I'm capable of. Like, maybe you were focused on my teammates in college, but this is me. Like, I'm here. And I'm seeing a lot of people being just like blown away by it. And it's really neat to see that happening on the same team in real time.
Yeah, definitely. And you touched on it. The IQ to me is what really stands out about them, is just they understand the game so well. They can really pick apart what they're trying to do offensively. Their connection has been really good. And that's being adaptable. And like you said, understanding kind of what is needed out of them, because they've played in those roles before. And now you're kind of seeing them take that next step in the W. But being able to kind of fit into a team right away is a credit to what they've done throughout their career, and what they're capable of.
And if any coach is going to be able to recognize good basketball IQ in a player, I talked a little bit about Sidney Johnson and his background with Coach Williams. And when you're coming from Princeton, like when you played at Princeton, when you coached at Princeton, like you know people that know ball. And so I love the group that they've built. I'm really excited for the potential for them to stay together going forward. That's like one of the teams that I've quickly latched on to as like, okay, I'm a Lynx fan, but the Mystics, they're just so fun.
Yeah, they really are. And I think we touched on this in one of our first episodes is just the vision. You can see it from their franchise. And that to me is the most important thing when you're looking at all these teams and with the upcoming CBA and what's the vision? Because you can kind of see who they've drafted and what they're looking at to do. And so when you're going to have this fluctuation of free agents and people going all over the place, it's going to be interesting to see what people choose to do, but you can see what the vision is of the franchise and what their base is right now with their core, rookie players.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, so excited. Well, I'm glad we got into a lot of topics as we usually do, but certainly a lot of, as we mentioned early, kind of struggles and people figuring it out, but getting into some of the good, some of the upswings I think we're seeing from some of these programs here on the back end. Well, Brittany, thank you so much for your perspective, for joining me today. As always, people can find you online at Brittany Carper, Brittany with 2 T's. I am Jay Steyes, JSTEYZ. You can find me on basically every social media platform. We'll be back next week. The Her Hoop Stats podcast will be back every weekday next week. And I assume Brittany and I will be coming at you late in the week like usual. So thanks so much for rolling with us, guys. Hope you guys have been enjoying. Make sure, as always, comment if give us some feedback. We're still figuring out sort of the minutia, the day to day on this new daily format. So we really appreciate the feedback we've gotten already. If you haven't already, make sure you like, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and we'll be back next week. Thank you.
Thank you.